we could start, huh? All right, could we all stand and say the pledge? I pledge allegiance to
Allegiance
the
to
flag
the United States of America and to the republic for
to God.
liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Okay, roll call, please.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Here.
Mr. Posnell,
Here?
Mr. Robinson,
Here.
Mr. Sanders,
Here.
Mr. Scalette,
Here.
Mrs. Schrader,
Unmute.
Here. Okay. Mr. Sears,
Here.
Mr. Sullivan,
Here.
and Mr. Tillman.
Here.
Okay, I would remind everybody to silence your cell phones. And this is the first opportunity for public comment. So, do we have any comments? Let's see.
We have one.
Okay. All right. This is from Jamie Evans. Everybody can see it, so I don't have to read it. Okay. All right. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, and I think you have attached the board minutes of the regular monthly meeting of March 27th. Are there any corrections, or I would suggest they be approved as submitted? Hearing none, we'll move on. Mr. Sears.
Okay, our estimated interest for the month of March is down at $76,461, and we expect it to continue to go down. We have a consent agenda. Would any board member like any of the items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of the items? If not, the chair moves approval of the below mentioned items.
We have a second.
Second.
Comments, questions? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you. For the board president's report tonight, I just want to make a couple of comments and then open it up to you folks for some comments back. We're facing some pretty difficult times right now. I think the state watched a budget surplus disappear over the matter of a couple of days. I think this is not going to get better over the next couple of years. If tomorrow they wave the wand and everything opened back up, we wouldn't see immediate comeback. So I think we're now at a point where we have to make some serious decisions moving forward. I think a little bit later, Kathy and Dr. Williams are going to present some short-term solutions for this year, but I worry that they're not enough. So I guess what I'd like you to think about a little is first, implementing a full-scale hiring freeze until we see what's going on. Another possibility if this continues is a salary freeze. If it still continues worse, I think we have to consider staffing reductions, and then we'll worry about next year with contract negotiations and everything. But I believe that what Kathy has done is amazing in terms of getting us close to balancing a budget, but I don't think we can raise taxes this year in good conscience. That's my opinion. So at that point, I will be quiet and open it up to anybody that wishes to speak.
John,
Yes.
question for you. You would talk about doing one or multiples of these suggestions of yours and not raising taxes at all this year?
That's correct.
Okay,
And the reason is we're at like 20% unemployed.
I got it.
It's going to get worse before it gets better. So I just really worry about the optics of saying we're going to raise your taxes 1%, 2%, 3% in times like this.
I would look at it, I have no problem with the tax increase if we look at some of the wages, and you had suggested a salary freeze, since some of these would look very hefty in light of the fact that there is such high unemployment. I'd have to think about no tax increase, because then we're going to dig, where would you dig into? Taking everything out of our fund balance?
No, that's why I'm looking at all these other options. I want everything to be on the table. I'm not
Yeah, our
advocating one
challenge-
over the other.
Oh,
Go
there's-
ahead.
No matter what we do to dig ourselves out of this hole for 1 year, we still have structural issues that were identified before the coronavirus impact.
right.
So this just made matters that were bad worse. And I'm concerned, I think, as John is, about how we deal with these structural issues. They were there before Corona.
So other thoughts?
We have absolutely no indications other than today when they were talking about up in the legislature, perhaps putting a freeze on property tax. That would be catastrophic, even more catastrophic than the catastrophe we have.
Well, no more catastrophic than if we decide to go with a zero increase.
I'm sorry, what kind of an increase, Joel?
I mean, if we went with a zero, that's essentially we're doing that through local control rather than legislature edict.
That is correct,
Except
yes.
it's a 1 year step,
Yeah,
potentially.
And I think we all know the implications is that, to keep the taxes as they are, that's how Act 1 takes us forward. We understand that. So if the legislature says you freeze your taxes, but you get nothing from the state in the way of compensation for that, either now or in the future, through some change or even a repeal of Act 1, then obviously the hole gets deeper.
right.
I don't like that. You guys know how I feel about property taxes.
Well, I since you're posing this question, John, in a way we're reflecting out loud as a committee for the first time. I need to continue to give this thought the way you framed it. But I would say, just as a few initial remarks, I think concern about the education of current and future generations is of the utmost importance. So I wouldn't frame it the way you are, though I would say that a tax increase would only make sense coupled with a reality that some of these other measures have been pursued. So that would be part of a full mix. So, I mean, in the one hand, I'm not, optics isn't the fundamental reflection here. It's the realities. Though I know that's not your point, John. But I would say that were we to take some of these other measures where we are sort of the difficult choices are being shared across many different variables, where taxpayers knew that this tax increase is only justified in relationship to other measures have been taken that are difficult measures, then I think that significantly addresses the optics question. In terms of the underlying justification, I think a mix of everything, I see them on par with each other in many ways.
Other thoughts? Michael, you're being quiet. Nothing? James?
I'll jump in. I can remember back post 9/11 when oil shot up dramatically. The blowback that gas stations got and gas station owners got for jacking up gas prices even before it filtered through. Now that's a private sector response, and I know we're in the public education sector, but I I don't know. I'm struggling with the no tax increase, but I will say this, that with 22 million filing unemployment, the impact and ripple effect that that's going to have, and just lay it out there. The fact that the job environment is going to be dramatically different when we get on the other side of this. I think sacrifices across the board need to be on the table. And I mean that from our lowest paid to our highest paid employees in the district. And I am really struggling with any type of pay increase without some significant justification or dollar for dollar expense reduction because of whatever that individual's actions were to justify their pay increase. I'm sorry, but when I'm watching people lose their jobs left and right, I just, I've been through 9/11. I've been through the 2008, 2009 crisis. We're going through this right now. It's hard to justify. 0% tax increase. I mean, I get the whole ripple through effect, but I don't know, to raise taxes on people that are losing their jobs and a lot of them are property owners right now. I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense. That's
Well, you use the phrase only get on the other side of it, James.
Yep.
My sense is we'll never get on the other side of it. We'll learn to live with it.
Yeah.
We're going to see permanent displacement in the economy. Many thousands of small businesses will never come back.
Mhm.
They just can't weather the storm. That doesn't mean that the folks won't find a job sometime in the future, but that might be 2, 3, 4 years. And honestly, some of the federal government programs that are being offered, and these guys in the legislature are talking trillions of dollars every time they open their mouths. Imagine you lose a job that pays $11 to $12 an hour and you get $15 an hour for sitting at home. What's your incentive to go to work? Those are the kind of signals that are being sent from Washington. This is not the same as any other crisis that we've been through in my lifetime.
What was Sam?
Well, of course, my first thought is, how's this going to impact kids? How is it going to impact our programming? We had a lot of visions 6 weeks ago that are now not going to be able to happen. I'm just struggling with it. And honestly, none of us know how it's going to be on the other side. And I don't think we should act based on what it's going to be on the other side. I think that's a wait and tell situation. I'm struggling with the hiring freeze, which was the first thing you said. I mean, never mind all the other things. Because we did have great vision of adding staff for benefit of kids. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. There's nobody on the board that doesn't think that's a priority, but I just want to put it back on the front burner, so to speak, that we have to think about how this is going to impact kids. And I guess that would be a question to the administration in terms of, what prioritize those hirings. Which of those hirings, in the administration's views, must we do, are the most important? I'm hesitant as a board to just with whole cloth say, okay, we're going to implement a hiring freeze. I'd like some discussion to hear from the administrators, the educators, regarding how this will impact programming, because it's not going to do us any good in the long run to freeze hiring, to not raise taxes, to not do anything if we're not going to benefit kids. I mean,
Well,
we have to.
I would point out, though, that by law, we have to balance the budget.
Understood.
And it won't do us any good in a year if we have to make wholesale cuts to balance the budget.
Agreed.
So I think we have to have some caution here.
No, I'm with you there. I understand that. As I said, I just want to put that back on the front burner as how this is going to impact kids. And, you know, again, past times were mentioned. There are, you know, a few of us on the board that went through those horrible times on the board. And we really, you know, pared down our staff and really were creative in terms of how we could avoid cutting programs. And, you know, it's putting that hat back on, I'm afraid. I mean, that's when we implemented the athletic fund, you know, where kids have to pay to participate in activities and things like that. We really pared down our administrators, for example, as a way to cut things, but yet not directly impact kids. So that's what I'm driving at, John. I know you know, you're preaching to the choir in terms of having to balance the budget and all, but you know, you asked for my thoughts, and that's what I'm thinking about is what's it going to do to kids? What's it going to do to programming? And that's got to come from administration.
Steve, you're next on my picture there. Sullivan?
Well, I think that, first of all, I can only respond, as I think is the case for everybody, to specific scenarios that Kathy comes up with. But I think we're talking about the options that we want her to look at in terms of modeling this. And I think what James said about shared sacrifice is the only way that we could possibly proceed with some sort of interior solution that involves, you know, you can't have the teachers agree to a hiring freeze or a pay freeze, but allow the benefit of zero tax increase for other folks, and you can't do it the other way around either. So it's all going to depend on what the numbers look like. But I think that we can't unilaterally disarm with respect to our degrees of freedom of raising revenue. And at the end of the day, you know, the tax bureau is going to probably be dealing with a spike in delinquencies anyway.
Right.
Because there are going to be a lot of folks who, no matter what the rate is, are not able to pay their tax bill, and that's going to be whatever it is. And I certainly hope the smart folks in Harrisburg have got something planned for when that happens, when that wave of delinquencies hits.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, frankly, Steve, that's not their problem.
Yeah. So, but I don't think the solution can be all one or the other.
Okay. Mr. Robinson, what do you think?
Well, I was afraid you were going to ask me, John. First off, I think it's a hell of a thing to have to make these kind of decisions, especially considering a hiring freeze and a salary freeze, when the administration and the faculty have done such an exemplary job bringing us through this crisis. I don't like it, but the reality is the reality. The tax freeze, I'm torn between that too. I mean, I think the concept of shared sacrifice is real. But the issue that I always struggle with is we're tagged with a lot of responsibilities for educating children by our friends in Harrisburg, and then they always start chipping away at the responsibility, or the authority rather. They give us the responsibility and try to usurp the authority. That's something I'm still struggling with in my own mind. Does that make any sense?
It does. Yes, it does. All right. Well, I think I've heard from everybody, so I will turn it back over to the administration now and let them present what they've got, and we can figure out where we want to go. I just wanted to hear from everybody with what we were looking at. So thank you. Dr. Williams.
Thank you. Good evening. Superintendent's report tonight. Our students and staff have now completed their third week of forward learning. Our teachers deserve our gratitude for what they've accomplished in a short amount of time. They have created virtual classroom environments that combine both synchronous and asynchronous activities. We're hearing from constituents that they appreciate our teachers' efforts and that the students are enjoying interacting in real time with their teachers and their classmates. As we progress through forward learning, we will transition from synchronous activities to more asynchronous activities. We expect teachers to continue using both types of activities, but the degree to which each is used may vary from classroom to classroom. Teachers will have the flexibility to structure their virtual classrooms as they see fit, and much like they do in their regular brick and mortar classrooms. While the efforts expended for forward learning solve near-term issues, I expect that things learned during this process will impact how we deliver instruction in the future. This experience has provided us an opportunity to learn ways to infuse online activities into our regular instruction once we have the ability to safely come together again. There will be positive outcomes from this troubling time. Thank you to the teachers who wholeheartedly embraced the challenge of forward learning, and thank you to the administrative team for its leadership in these interesting times. I would also like to point out the extraordinary efforts of Mr. Vince Henry and his staff for making it possible for our teachers to deliver instruction. I would also like to recognize and to thank Mrs. Allie Cunningham for her Herculean professional development efforts to help teachers adapt to online learning environments. And finally, thank you to our parents who, in many cases, are trying to support their children's learning while they themselves are trying to work from home. We're all fortunate to be a part of such a strong learning community. And while forward learning consumes most of our energies right now, there are some other things about which I'd like to report. The first item is Act 80 days. We're asking you on the agenda tonight to approve some Act 80 days. Act 80 days take the place of classroom instruction, and we used 3 to 5 Act 80 days, depending on how you look at it, during the 10 dark days when we were all shut down. There were 3 days, March 25, 26, 27, where all K through 12 was doing Act 80 days, professional development. And the following Monday and Tuesday, the elementary level was doing professional development as well. So we're asking you to approve those as Act 80 days, and also asking you to approve up to 7 additional Act 80 days that we will tack on to the end of the year. I don't know that we'll do all 7 because we do want to recognize the efforts that the teachers have put in, but the association also understands the value in professional development. So how that plays out yet, we're not quite sure, but it won't be 7 and it won't be 0. Kindergarten registration. Historically, we typically have about 105 new kindergartners at each of the 2 buildings. As of right now, we have 50 new kindergartners registered at one building and 36 at the other. Certainly, the pandemic is affecting the registration process, making it more difficult. And those who know of people who should be registering their child for kindergarten, our webpage has an area for people to go and start that process. And if you know somebody who should be registering for kindergarten, please encourage them to do so. The 2020-21 budget, Mrs. Chichuli has been working hard to refine the budget. More on that later in the meeting. And meal distribution, we've trimmed down meal distribution from 5 days a week to 3 days a week, and doing it at 2 locations, the high school and the middle school. So Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays from 10 to noon, students can pick up 2 lunches and 2 breakfasts each day. So in essence, even though we're cutting down the number of days that were available for this, we're providing the opportunity for more meals than we otherwise would have. In the old system, they could get 5 meals a week. In this system, they can get 6. So that's a way to conserve funds and still supply meals to students. And it's for all students, any student 0, or I should say age 1 to 18. Adults can also buy a lunch for $4 a piece. The Impact Foundation, which is part of York Suburban Education Foundation, is also ramping up its efforts to help families get through the weekends if they're in need of food and supplies and those kinds of things. I have a link in the superintendent's report that I'll be providing when it's published. And if anyone who wants to go help or needs help, they can go to the ysef.org website for that help or to donate. And the student enrollment report will be attached to this when it gets posted. And that concludes the formal formal superintendent's report. Also have tonight, I guess, if you want to tackle, Mr. Posnow, the Act 80 request, and then we'll get to the administrator's report.
Sure, you heard the board recommendation that we approve an additional 7 days of Act 80. to schedule in the manner of the administration's discretion. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second. Thank you. Questions or comments? I guess this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
Who was the second?
Okay.
Oh, I was a second.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Okay. Thank you.
And thank you for that. And tonight we have, I think, Dr. Gully and Dr. Ellis with us tonight. Let's start with Dr. Gully tonight.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to share with you a brief summary on our YSSD Forward Learning Elementary Model. Mrs. Irwine did post a Q&A answer sheet that we have. Tried to come up and pretty much give you the structure of what the elementary division is working through at this point. As you recall, we started forward learning at the elementary level back on April 1st. We just finished our 13th day today, so we are into our 3rd week of instruction. The one thing I want you to note, which is at the very bottom of this sheet, is a very important link. It is from a 3rd grade classroom. And what it does is gives you a journey of a 3rd grade classroom, both from Mrs. Mahorny and Mrs. Poster. And it's truly a summary from the very first day to where we are now during the 3 weeks. It gives you that up close and personal look at where we started and that journey. Not only gives you from a teacher perspective, but also a student and along with a parent too, because at the elementary level, our parents are usually over the shoulder of our students as they are going through the process of synchronous instruction as well. I will tell you that the professional development that we've had up to this point, we've continued to develop and refine and reflect, and the teachers have just been amazing with what we've been doing as far as the learning process, but also our students and our parents too, and everybody's been very flexible. But overall, it has just been an outstanding process that I feel like we are really in a good groove, good routine at this point, and we're moving forward. So again, please make sure you do check out the video. And then secondly is the Q&A answer sheet that does tackle most of the questions that you might have about the elementary model. So again, that is something that you can review at your time. Any thoughts, comments, or questions?
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to point out that I did get a chance to check out that video very quickly tonight. I didn't get to see all of it, but it really is worth watching, very interesting. And thank you to your staff for pulling that off. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Gully. Dr. Ellis.
Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. Thanks for giving us a few opportunities here to talk a little bit about what's been happening at the high school. I'm so pleased to share, and Dr. Williams already shared it. Things have been going extremely well with forward learning. I'm so proud of the work of the teachers and also the students. They have turned around 10 years or 12 years in some case of their expectations of what school's supposed to look like, and are learning very quickly how to do this in the new model. And they're persevering. They're overcoming some of the challenges, and certainly very, very proud of that. Certainly here are far more positives than negatives. The only negatives I seem to get from time to time is that kids aren't real engaged. And then I remind them it's April of the school year. That's typical of most senior students, that they're looking to other things and other pieces. They may not be completely engaged in school, but I've gotten very few comments to that effect. For the most part, students have really been buying in. They've been doing well. They're learning the new system, and I'm so proud of the work the teachers have been doing to build great lessons for them to engage in. Of course, you also know that late April and May are the busy times around campus to celebrate the seniors, awards nights, planning for graduation, all those various activities. Also trying to help the 8th graders transition to 9th grade. So we've been working hard to put some plans in place. Just recently, I sent a message out to all the seniors and senior parents with a couple save the dates. I had the opportunity to meet with the student council officers as well as the senior class officers last week to start making some plans for some of the activities here in April and May. And really came about 2 priorities for that. those activities. The first was to make sure that we do recognize the kids for the awesome job they've done over the 13 years of their school year and to recognize them as graduates. So that's certainly one of our priorities. But the most important priority to them, and I really hope we have an opportunity to do it, is they want to be able to come together as a class. They want to have that last opportunity to be together, to take pictures, to hug and do all those kinds of things that typically happen at that graduation night. So I really hope that we can come up with something over the course of the summer that we have some freedom to be able to do that, that the requirements start to be lifted and we can get the group back together, because that is really, really important to the seniors. And if we're not able to do it this summer, we'll look to do something at homecoming in the fall. And if we can't do it at homecoming in fall, we'll find another opportunity. For instance, the music teachers are talking about allowing the kids to come back and perform in the December concert, just so they get one last chance to perform. So I'm excited to hear all these different pieces that have been popping up, the great ideas that teachers have had to recognize the seniors, whether it's from sports or athletics. The Trojan Theater is trying to plan a production in August if we're able to pull it off. So they're coming up with a lot of ideas to give our seniors one last opportunity to perform and to show the great work that they've done over their careers. Also pleased to share that we're still continuing with our transition activities. Our Link Crew members and our administrators are going to visit 8th grade classrooms virtually in May to talk about the transition to high school, to try to simulate as many of those activities as well as we can. We're also looking at some alternative plans for awards nights to make sure that all of our kids that earned honors, scholarships, and all those various recognitions get a chance to be recognized here this spring, even though we can't do it in person. So a lot of planning that's going into it. Certainly appreciate all the efforts of the teachers to make this an awesome spring for the kids. And I guess I'll wrap up there. Any questions or anything that I can share with all of you?
Questions? I think you're off the hook.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Ellis. And that concludes our superintendent's report.
John, before we move on, we're having a technical problem. Rich cannot hear us, and I wonder if Vince might be able to get in touch with him and help him.
He's on.
He has texted me that he cannot hear.
Has he tried logging off and logging back
Yeah,
on?
I would get out and get back in.
I recommended that, and I believe he tried.
Mrs. Tuchuli just noted in the minutes that he dropped off for this brief period of time. If there's any votes, we won't be able to record him. He can also try restarting his computer. I've had this problem all the time.
Yeah, because from Vince's side, everything is working.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tuchuli.
Okay, I have several items for board consideration. The first one is the annual approval of the agreement with WellSpan to conduct physical examinations. This is $15 per student and a consultation fee of $500. These are the same rates as 1920.
Do you know how many times the service was actually used?
Let's have a motion first.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, now.
Sorry. Do you know how many times the service was actually used last year or historically? Just curious.
I do not, but I can contact People's Services and find out and follow up.
Be kind of interesting to see. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? I think this one can be a unanimous roll call vote.
Okay. This would be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. And I'm recording 8-1 at the moment until, oh, Mr. Robinson is on, so.
Okay. Can you hear us, Rich? I don't think he can hear us, no.
Okay.
I texted him and requested that he reboot, but I'm not sure if he's done that.
Okay.
Okay, the next item are the bid results for the East York and Indian Rock Elementary flooring project. The lowest bid came in at ECI Construction for the amount of $192,500 to be funded out of the 2019 Capital Projects Fund.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Questions or comments? And this can be a short roll call vote as well.
Okay. This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The third item is an alternate to the flooring project, and this is for the library at East York. And the alternate came in at $22,000 for ECI.
So move.
Second.
Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The next item is the annual agreement, approval of the annual agreement with Rupert Detective Agency. The hourly rate is $19.50 per hour, and the agreement is effective August 15th. This is typically used for events.
Okay.
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
Second.
Any questions or comments? This can be unanimous then.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The next motion I have for the board's consideration is the renewal contract with Whitson's School Nutrition Corp.
Hey Rich, this is Vince Henry. Trying to get a hold of you to help you with your
Hey Vince,
issues.
you're muted. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Board approval of the renewal agreement with Whitson's School Nutrition Corp. as the district's food service management company.
So move.
Second.
Okay. Questions or comments? This can be unanimous.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. The next item is board approval of the food service budget for 2021 school year, and I believe that I've linked the full budget for review on the agenda.
You did.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Questions or comments? This can be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes. All right, so we're going to move into the informational section of the business office report. The first item is the 2019-20 year-to-date budget. This is a document that you would typically see at the Property and Finance Committee meeting, but since I did not have it available for you at that time, and I thought we were talking about budget, it would be useful to have it at this meeting. So a couple of highlights I've indicated in the orange, the current year, as opposed to the gray that is in the prior year. And if we look at the current year revenues, you'll see that we're at 92.34% of what we've budgeted for incoming revenues. The
Kathy, can
majority
you
of,
expand that, please?
Wendy, can you make it larger?
Yes.
How's that?
Thank you.
The majority of your local revenues are coming in on the local side. So I'll give you a couple of highlights of what that entails. Of course, about 70% comes from real estate taxes. Outside of that, we have interim taxes that were received at $262,000. We budgeted $152,000, so we've exceeded budget by $110,000. Our earned income tax has come in at 70% of what we've budgeted, and it's up $38,000 from last year at this time. Our real estate transfer tax is at 95% of budget, but we're slightly down from last year at this time by $14,000. And then interest earnings are also down slightly by $58,000. I think Mr. Sears noted that in his finance report. State revenues as well as federal revenues all align current year to prior year. The only concern that we have at this point is that there may be some subsidy delays as we feel the impacts of the COVID-19. We've had no indications of that, but an example of the effects is that today, the homestead farmstead allocation, so that gaming money was certified, and it was certified less than last year. So we are starting to see the effects of COVID-19. On the expense side, you'll see that we're at 67% of what we've budgeted for the year, really in line with last year, slightly down. But half of the month of March, we went into the stay-at-home order, and so expenses were down for the half of the month. We have closed the budget effectively today. Our hope in closing the budget is to create some savings that will carry us through the next couple of months as we realize some of those effects. So I'm hoping that by closing the budget at this time that we would generate up to $1.5 million in surplus, of which $800,000 comes from transportation. So if the board decides that we will pay the transportation contract as stated, then that, of course, those savings will go down. This amount is also dependent on any incoming revenues that we may have or the delay of subsidy payments. Any questions on the year-to-date budget?
So the transportation was in the 1.5 million, correct?
It is.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on. If there are no other questions regarding the year-to-date budget, we'll move on to the budget presentation. Okay, so we're going to review the timeline, and some of this is a repeat from information that I provided to you at the Property and Finance Committee meeting. We'll look at some COVID-19 impacts on the budget, the estimated 2021 proposed budget, and some things to consider the next steps. On the timeline, we had to make some adjustments to the timeline. We were slated to pass the proposed final budget on April 6th. We've moved that to tonight's agenda. In addition to that, in order to meet the 30 days and allow for additional work to the budget if needed, we've moved the final budget adoption to June 15th. And then we'll certify we'll submit the certification of use to PDE on June 16th. My apologies for the typo on this slide. On the next slide,
Kathy, before you go on with
Yes.
the timeline, if we vote to accept the proposed budget tonight, we're still able to make changes throughout, even though we've advertised for June 15th.
Absolutely.
This is not locked in.
You're not locked into this budget tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Did someone else speak? Some of the items that we've discussed at the Property and Finance Committee meeting were some revenue impacts. There were some, and continue to be, capital rumors. Some of them were inclusive of extending the discount period by 30 days. So by law, the discount period goes through August 31st. There has been consideration that school districts delay that through the September 30th, while mortgage companies will still be required to remit payment during the normal time frame. Another discussion that the legislation had was on property tax freeze proposal. There was one last month and the discussion did not go anywhere. And then today again, the House bill was pulled off the table. So while right now there's no action on it or directive from the state, we'll still continue to anticipate some guidance from the state on local taxes. Transfer and income taxes will be impacted by the economic downturn. We know that we'll have some effects on earned income tax as the unemployment rates continue to rise. We anticipate that in delinquent taxes, the balances will increase and our collections will decrease. We'll see a reduce of earnings on investments relative to the low interest rates, and not as big, but still significant are the revenues for facility usage and any revenues that we may have brought in from the state student activity fees. On the state and federal side, on the state, we anticipate that there will be a delay in the adoption for the state budget. We anticipate that there will be no increase to basic ed and special education. With transportation, we anticipate that although we are not being penalized for the 180 days, the subsidy for the transportation formula is based on the actual days that we provided pupil transportation and the actual costs. So we will see some impact to that if one, we don't pay transportation, and two, the number of days do not equal to the number of school days. And we anticipate that there will be further delay on subsidy payments. On the federal side, it is unknown the impact of federal money that will be diverted for COVID-19 initiatives. On the expense side, while the PSERS employer contribution is locked in for 2021, we do anticipate that there would be an increase in employer contribution due to the reduction in investment earnings. We may experience higher claims values when we look at the healthcare rates, and then other expenses due to ensure that there's no disruption in the day-to-day operations or instruction to our students. While there are many unknowns, we know that locally we will experience some impact. And to help us with our analysis, we use the 2008 recession as a basis for year one. So we took a look at the budget for the 2008 and 2009 school year and compared it to the annual financial report to evaluate the performance. And that is how we made our changes to the 2021 budget. So some of the changes include, based on the conversations we had at the Property and Finance Committee meeting, We increased real estate taxes by 2%. We included the use of fund balance for insurance of $869,400. And we'll update this information after open enrollment. Earned income tax, we decreased by 5%. Interest earnings, we decreased by 45%. We lowered basic ed and special education to the 1920 allocations. And we did add the CARES federal stimulus funds. And we did receive an estimate at this time of $288,434. I do have to note that the CARES stimulus funds must be shared with non-pubs. So we may not be entitled to the full amount. So based on this information, we did increase revenues by $1,439,000. On the expense side, we made some changes to the pupil services budget and we decreased that by $300,000. And we removed the debt service millage phase-in of 0.16, which totaled $282,670. While we understand that this is one of our goals, we also want to be conscious of an understanding of what our community members will go through in the upcoming months. And so our expenditures have changed by $582,670. So this is just an Excel spreadsheet of what those numbers look like. At the Property and Finance Committee meeting, we were starting off with 60.2 million in revenues and 63.6 million in expenditures with a deficit of 3.3. After the changes, our revenues at 61.7 million and expenditures are at 63 million, giving us a new deficit of 1.3 million. The next slide shows you the comparison of the current year to the proposed budget, as well as the 4-year forecast. Some things to consider. I anticipate that legislation will continue to have discussions on real estate taxes. While this is a local level, they're concerned that they want to relieve some pressure off of taxpayers. And for them, this is one of them. So whether or not we may impose a tax increase, the legislation may require us to do a 0%. This is not by any means a worst case scenario. We use the 2008-9 as a benchmark. Property taxes can certainly be at a greater impact, especially if we consider certain things. Our collection rate may go down, although I did not see that during the 2008 recession. We may be in different circumstances. As I mentioned before, the delinquent tax balances will increase. Interim taxes will decrease, and the raise of unemployment will impact our earned income tax. I believe that this is year one of perhaps 2 or 3 years. And so I also believe that our budgetary challenges can be worse in year 2 and 3 as we continue to see the effects of the pandemic. Some ideas that Dr. Williams and I have come up with as far as to help our community members and will still have an impact on our budget is extending the discount period by 30 days. At the very minimum, we have to do it by August 31st. The board has the option of extending that past the 31st of August. We also can allow for additional installments. At a very minimum, we have to allow 3 installments. We can allow 4 or 5 additional installments to help taxpayers. The last option is eliminating the penalty fee that is imposed in December. All of these have consequences, of course. If we eliminate the penalty fee, then there's no incentive for taxpayers to pay taxes before December 31st. And so that may cause a cash flow problem. Nevertheless, taxes will still be due December 31st if we go that route. Next steps, board action on the proposed final. As I mentioned before, you are not locked into this budget. If you pass the proposed final tonight, you still have 2 months to make changes to the budget. The next time we vote on the final budget is on June 16th. We'll advertise for public inspection, so we'll post the budget on the 2028, the PDE form as required, and that will be on the district website. And as we make changes, we'll also add those changes to the district website so our community members are aware. The homestead farmstead allocations are released the first week of May, and so we'll see what our allocations are. We'll implement any board changes to the budget if there are any, and then final budget at our regular meeting. And that is the end of my report. Are there any questions?
Mrs. Chichilli, you mentioned that under the CARE monies, the $288,000 has to be shared with their non-public schools. How is that figured out? I mean, how do they figure the percentages of what each of these schools would get?
We have not received any guidance on how that money will be split.
Okay.
Kathy, with regard to the installments, it's my recollection that in discussing this a couple of years ago, we were told that not very many of our community members use that feature. Do you have any information about that? I mean, I think that would be a very helpful thing to some families. I'd like to see us do that. But
I will have to get back to you on how many participate. I would imagine that in the beginning, not very many were participating in the installments. But as individuals became more aware of the program and were able to, they could have increased.
So that would really impact, am I thinking this through properly? That would really only impact people who don't have a mortgage.
Or who pay outside of their mortgage.
Okay. Thank you. Is that something we could vote on tonight and implement that change now, or when would we make that change if we were going to?
Has to be by August, I think, right?
It has to be by the time we print out bills, because we put directions on the bills.
So that would be in the next month.
Meeting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Are there any other questions?
If we make some of these changes, Kathy, and extend, we give them 5 payments instead of 3 payments, we extend the deadline for the 2% for the discount. Are you feel fairly confident that we won't have cash flow issues, or does that remain to be seen depending on what the state does?
I think that would remain to be seen depending on what the state does.
I know this is all like, gee, if we had a magic crystal ball, or, you know, we could figure this all out, but, you know,
Yeah.
I don't want to see us get stuck in a cash flow issue. I mean, I know back in 2008-9, that was a huge concern of, you know, of school districts.
I think in 2008-9 too, the fund balance wasn't where it is now.
That is true. That is true.
Makes a
But
huge difference and gives us.
and then was that the years or was prior to that when or maybe it was later than that when the state budget wasn't approved until December or January or something? I mean, districts had a real problem those years. I mean, that was
Yeah,
pure cash flow.
Yeah, there were districts that were borrowing money just to make ends meet until the money came in.
Yeah.
We will not be in that type of a situation because of the fund balance. Yep.
Okay.
Okay, moving on.
Okay. I guess I want to ask, just so that I make sure it doesn't impact the vote, but where does the board want to be with respect to the tax increase? Do you want to continue to have that discussion? Given Mr. Posnow's opening comments, do you want to continue to have that discussion? And I'm asking as preparation for the next meeting.
Well, I'm happy to start by saying I support where the current proposal stands. I mean, in a sense, yes, I think given the plurality of views that were expressed, that it seems important to have some discussion on it. Yet I can express my own point of view that I don't see it as all neutral. I see your current proposal as appropriate, and yet I invite the board to discuss it.
There is one more committee meeting before the vote, correct?
There is a Property and Finance Committee meeting
May
on
7th.
the 10th.
Okay.
But we also have both meetings. I mean, we have both the May meeting and then the June voting meeting, correct? I mean, not that you want to be making changes on the June 15th meeting, but.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first item after the presentation is a recommendation for the board approval of the 2021 proposed final in the amount of $63,034,472.
Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Who was the second?
Was it Rich?
Yeah, it was.
Okay, it was Rich.
Wanted to prove I was here.
So are there other questions or discussion? Can we make this a roll call vote, please?
We can. Mr. Posnow,
Yes.
Mr. Sears,
Yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Yes.
Mrs. Schrader,
Yes.
Mr. Scalette,
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Mr. Tobin,
Yes.
Mr. Sullivan.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 9-0. The last item on the business office report is the approval of the resolution authorizing the administration to advertise and publicly display the board's intention to adopt the 2021 final general fund budget at the regular meeting scheduled on June 15th.
So moved.
Second.
Questions or comments? This one can probably be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Thank you.
Mrs. Chichilla, you're going to post some of these links to the agenda or the minutes or something? Are they there?
Yes,
Oh.
all of the information that I provided to you tonight is on the agenda.
Okay, finally, okay.
Is that it for you? You finished, Kathy?
Yes, sorry,
Okay.
I was muted.
Ms. Geyer,
Hello.
long time no see.
Yeah, I know. The swimming pool was under maintenance, so it was hard to make it to some meetings, so I apologize for that. Also, my microphone was a little wacky today, so I apologize if you can't hear me.
You're good.
So due to the pandemic, winter sports did have an unfortunate end, but did have some pretty successful results. So for the swimming all-stars, we have for the girls, Kaisa Fryer, Savannah Hunt, Megan Lonergan, and myself. And then for the boys, we have Matthew Peters, CJ Zortman, Calvin Kohler, and Shay Walsh. And then for our wrestling all-stars for the YAIAA League, we have Noah Rice and Naz Spellman for getting honorable mention. And then for our boys basketball all-stars, Aiden Hughley made first team, Anthony Brown made second team, and so did Camden Brewer. And then for girls basketball, Alyssa Hawker made first team, and Kiana Dowling made honorable mention. Due to the unfortunate circumstances, the students are still working hard and keeping themselves busy with Zoom and in the classroom, and they're also giving back to the community. Dr. Williams did mention this, but Impact Foundation has just expanded their Food for Thought backpacking program into a full-on food pantry. So they have fresh food, eggs, milk, and ingredients for a week's worth of meals and toiletries. And they also have been collecting craft supplies and books to keep kids busy. Also, the girls field hockey team is giving back to community because they just made a PSA video bringing awareness to the corona pandemic. And they are teaching people how to stay healthy and safe during this time. And we just did student council elections for our overall president, vice president, and secretary. So congratulations to Madison Paring for being our new president, Brooke Sargent for being our vice president, and Leon Bellenbaum for being our secretary. And your new school board representative for next year is Carly Bowen. That concludes my report. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy during this.
Thanks so much. Okay, you have the link to the committee meeting schedule here, and the first committee is Academic Standards and Curriculum. Mr. Scalette.
Yes, hello. We met on April 6th at 2 p.m., and this was a virtual meeting. I'd like to offer a quick summary of some of the leading points. First of all, there was extensive discussion of the Forward Learning Program, and there's a link on the yssd.org website that I invite any and all to go view with significant information. And let me also say that this committee seems to be an appropriate place if there are community members or others who want to offer feedback or further discussion on how forward learning is going, to please send information to this committee. Second, Pennsylvania is requiring every district to have a continuity of education plan, and that was reviewed, and the district is working on that. And then there were updates at the elementary, middle school, and high school levels on the forward learning progress. The next item was a discussion of a middle school ELA textbook adoption recommendation, which the committee unanimously supported. And this was put forward by the administration as their recommendation. Then the last item I'll mention is the next meeting date, which is scheduled for May 20th, where there will be a continued discussion of updates regarding how forward learning is going. And there will be a discussion of Roots and Wings, which was a new course that was centered on social and emotional learning. And there'll be updates on the progress in that course. Do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, this is Joel.
Yes, hi, Joel.
Steve, since we have several board members who have students in the district, I wonder if we might get some feedback from parents about how they view forward learning.
Yes, I mean, do you propose that as a solicitation by the committee?
Actually, just some comments now.
Question to the group.
Oh, I see, from us.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thanks, yes.
Well, the Sullivan boys haven't gone feral, for what it's worth.
They've gone feral?
Have not.
They have not. There's been good communication from the teachers. When they've needed to change something week to week, we've been informed, generally with plenty of time. I think the kids are learning a lot about what will be good electronic communications habits that'll serve them well in their working lives going forward. I think everybody's adapting very well, both the students and the faculty.
Thank you.
A couple things. I think the time to questioning, you don't have to wait till they get home to deal with dad. It's pretty immediate when I find out they're not on their computer or in class. I'm kidding, but no, I find that the communication levels have been very good and responsive when we've had questions. I've got a kindergartner, sixth grader, and high schooler, so I kind of have it coming from all angles. You know, the kindergartner especially looks forward to getting on and seeing his buddies each day, and you know, I applaud the district and everybody that made this happen, because you know, I have friends and people that teach in other districts, and you know, they have a lot of yeah buts, but you know, the big question I have for them is, are you guys providing as much education as we are? And the answer is typically no. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I guess I could add something. So I have a seventh grader, and I have this, I suppose, somewhat unique perspective in that I'm a college professor, so I'm doing online teaching. So I see it from that end, and then I have a student where you know, I've had the privilege of seeing what kind of experience she's having, and as I said at the committee meeting, I believe that York Suburban has done a wonderful job of communicating, and with the teachers who have stepped up to try to make the best of it. So in fact, you know, my own experience is looking at the nuances of how this will evolve, and that the students still have a month to go, I suppose, and it's no longer a novelty. So you know, so it's as if you know, it's almost as like it's, even as it's moving so fastly, it's almost like entering a middle stage of beyond the initiation of it, and now to continue to work out ways to make it improve, with issues that came up at the committee level, like how to create a varied day where, you know, students aren't sitting for 5 hours and then do 3 hours of homework sitting, and you know, so how to work all that out, and how to balance the synchronous and the asynchronous in ways that are productive, and so, you know, I see the district continuing to work on a range of detailed on the grounds and the trenches issues. But the overall impression I have, I share the other members of the board, is kudos to the district.
Thank you. Personnel Committee, Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Pozow. As soon as the agenda comes back up, coming back up, there it is. You have before you the personnel report, which includes employment and volunteers. Would any member of the board like these items considered separately, or are there any questions on any of these items? If not, the chair moves approval of the below mentioned items.
I'd like to have employment considered separately from volunteers.
Okay.
Can I ask a question, something about Ms. Martin's background, the person who's being hired for the payroll and benefits position?
Of course. Your question is?
You know, what's some of her experience, maybe where she's coming from, that kind of thing?
Sure, she's coming from the College of York. All of her experience is in payroll processing. She has a bachelor's degree in computer science, and she comes with a load of payroll and benefits experience.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on employment?
Is it possible to postpone this for a month without losing candidates since we're still jockeying with money?
We don't have a second, just so.
Oh, okay. Do we have a second to Rich's?
I'll second it just to keep things moving.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about that.
I guess this was to the administration. Is it possible to delay this till the next meeting?
Well,
If I,
we can delay anything, but we may be delaying the inevitable. It's an ESL position we can't do without because of numbers of students. And I'll let Kathy speak to the payroll benefits.
I hate that person, that one.
I desperately need a payroll person.
Okay.
She's been going a long time without this, and the departments that stretched very, very thinly.
Yeah, I think this is going to be, these are positions that we have to hire. We're not going to be able to not fill the retirement slots, for example, and that's what this ESL slot is.
Right. We wouldn't, and even if we wanted to, we wouldn't have the luxury of being able to eliminate that ESL position because the numbers dictate that we need that position.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Would we like a roll call vote on employment, Mr. Posnow?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Sullivan,
Yes.
Mr. Tillman,
Yes.
Mr. Sears, Mr. Sears,
Oh, Joe.
Yes.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes.
Mrs. Fryrick,
Yeah, yes.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Mr. Posnow,
Sigh. Yes.
Mrs. Scalette,
Yes.
and Mrs. Schrader.
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0.
Item B on the agenda is recommended approval of the following volunteers effective April 21, 2020. Is that in the form of a motion?
Second.
Any questions?
Nothing. So this can be a unanimous roll call vote.
Okay. This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
That concludes my report, and my mic is still on.
Hey.
Yeah.
Property and Finance, Mr. Sears.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The minutes of the March 11th meeting are provided, and they're available in hard copy at the business office. They're linked on the agenda. Property and Finance met on April 8th at noon via Zoom. We had a very interesting presentation from Whitson's outlining their 2021 initiatives, some new contract guarantees as discussed in Ms. Chichuli's report. And then we moved to the business office report, got some information on the cafeteria budget. We then segued to property-related matters, talking about the new construction planning process, for which I thank Ms. Chichuli greatly. We got a current project update from Barry, and there was the one thing I think that was really of note here was there were no bids received on the middle school mechanical upgrade, so that will be rebid as we understand it, with an opportunity for some of the smaller bidders to break out their piece of it. We then moved to finance-related issues, talked about the 2021 budget, discussed the assumptions, had a chance to see the impact of several different scenarios, running tax increases from 0 to 3.1. We closed with a request to the administration to evaluate the impact of a 2% tax increase in the hiring freeze. We adjourned around 1:40. The next meeting is May 13th, and according to our website, that's a 5 p.m. meeting. That may be changed, but 5 p.m. now. My assumption is that that will also be a Zoom meeting. And that concludes that piece of it. Now we have 2 items for voting, and I'll just read those off. The Property and Finance Committee recommends the board approve the repair of the high school natatorium pool filter to be funded out of the 2019-20 Capital Projects Fund. And just to jog your memory, that's a $41,000 item as opposed to a $70,000 complete overhaul. So we're going to repair rather than replace.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Questions or comments? So I think this could be a unanimous roll call vote.
This will be considered a unanimous roll call vote unless I hear votes to the contrary. Hearing none, motion passes.
Okay, and the last item is a recommendation for approval on May 18th. And that recommends board approval of the PFM Financial Advisors LLC organization to serve as the district's independent financial advisor.
Shouldn't be municipal. I have a question on that. Do we have to?
Well, he had a motion. Do we have a second?
John, there's not a motion.
No motion.
Okay, all right, okay, then go ahead.
Just a question. To my recollection, we've never specifically voted on approving advisors or independent, whatever. We frequently have gone to various architects or engineering firms or things like that for advice or counsel. Is there a particular reason why we're going to be specifically voting on PFM?
This is just a best practice that I'm accustomed to.
And if it's a contract over $100, you should be approving it on the board.
Well, it's not a contract actually, is it?
Will be.
They're going to bill you for services at an approved rate, I would assume.
Correct.
But there's no given time frame or anything like that, is there? I mean, this is a formal contract then.
Yeah. You're engaging in their services.
Okay.
So when we're ready to do a bond issuance, and if you don't approve them now, then you'll be required to approve them before you do a bond issuance.
Okay, we had never done that with our other bond council, RBC, or anything like that. This was just something a little bit new. That was all. Kind of curious why we were doing this. Thank you.
Well, it was my understanding, I think, from finance that we haven't had this kind of advisor before. Is that right?
Right, that was part of the discussion, was
right.
This would provide us some benefit.
Yeah.
You've always had an underwriter.
Yep.
Acting on your behalf, and so this is an addition.
Yep.
Okay, just curious. And it is a financial advisor, not a municipal advisor?
It's a financial advisor.
Okay, thank you.
That concludes my report.
Okay, thank you.
So
Mr.
we don't
Robinson.
have to vote on this?
No.
No, it's just information.
Okay.
Mr. Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Pose. Now, in the legislative area, the hot action concerned House Bill 974, which I believe Mr. Chuli referred to. It was an amendment introduced by the House Minority Leader, Amendment A05098 to freeze local school property taxes. If I'm not mistaken, that amendment or the bill was tabled, but I suspect the attempt will be made again in the future. PSBA urged all clear-thinking members of school boards to call their representatives and voice their opposition. Several of us did. I don't want to say that was the reason the bill was tabled.
Yeah.
Go ahead and say it.
Okay, we
So
did
we
it.
beat up on them.
Yes. It was a victory for justice.
Yes.
That concludes my report.
Thank you. Ms. Frerick.
Yes, you have before you the Dawn's Early Light, which is the highlights of the LIU board meeting. Rather interesting. You might want to take a look at them. As far as the LIU JOA, I have no report. And continuing York Adams Academy, we have a board meeting, virtual board meeting tomorrow evening. We're going to be looking at how we're going to handle graduation and making sure our kids get their diplomas and all those kinds of good things, as well as looking for some staffing issues for next year. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. York Adams Tax Bureau, Ms. Chichuli.
No report.
Thank you. York County School of Technology.
Yes, the last month's meeting was canceled. We have a meeting this week on Thursday, also via Zoom. Just because I mentioned it in my last report, it's my understanding that construction has resumed. It was put on hold as deemed non-essential, but it's my understanding that it is ongoing now. And that concludes my report. Really not
Thank
much
you.
happening.
Okay. You've got the link to the board meeting schedule here. And do we have any more public comment? I guess I could take that as a no.
Well, wait.
She's checking.
Okay.
There is a second one up.
It looks like there's a second one.
Well, here we go.
I think it's the right arrow button on the previous screen. So the
No.
the right caret to the right of the two.
Yeah, try that.
There you
Bingo.
go. Okay, here you go.
Oh, there's John Stayer.
The public is here
Oh.
for no comment.
Just announcing his presence. Okay. Then if there's nothing else, I guess we can be adjourned.